In this video, we will cover the history of telecommunication. Tele stands for distance, basically communication over a distance. Why should you study history? So here are two quotes, read them up. But to me, it is more of a curiosity and often it makes a very fascinating read. Man, being a social animal, has a fundamental need to communicate. Now, how do you think communication, that is long distance communication, was done in prehistoric times? So one of the methods is smoke signals. This is a visual means of communication. Have you guys seen Lord of the Rings movie? There you can see the smoke signals in action where Gondar sends a signal to Rohan asking for help. Basically, they light a fire on top of a mountain. The amount of information you can carry through smoke signals is very limited. For example, in that case, fire means help, no fire means nothing is happening. Now, suppose you want to send more information, what can you potentially do? Let's say this is the incline of the mountain. Depending on where you start the smoke, you can convey more information. For example, if you start the smoke here, it says all is well. If you start the smoke here, that means there is some danger. By the way, if no fire doesn't mean all is well. Some things could still have gone wrong, but if a fire says all is well, that definitely means all is well. Even with all this, the amount of information that you can convey through smoke signals is very limited. If you really want to convey more information, people used to use drums. In fact, in some of the African countries, they have this thing called a talking drum, which has a language of its own, and you can convey complex sentences using it. For example, using the talking drum, you could convey a message 100 miles within an hour. Of course, this is done through relays, but that is still quite impressive. So there is a video in the reference material that shows how talking drums work. I think you should watch it. So that was prehistoric. How do you think communication happened in BC, that is before Christ? So these days we don't use BC, we use before Common Era. This basically means BC. So at that time, postal system was already developed. Specific to India, the Mauryan Empire developed a very sophisticated postal system, and people also used to use pigeons for carrying messages by tying the message to the leg of the pigeon. What is more interesting is this hydraulic semaphore. So basically they employ a device like this. It has a basin which is filled with water, and there is a rod inserted here which has different code words. For example, this may say all is well, this may say move the children and the women away, and this may say prepare the catapults, whatnot. So these were typically used during wartime. So the way this works is you use a torch, basically a smoke signal, for synchronization. So when this person lifts the torch, the other end person sees the torch and both of them are going to pull the plug. So water starts to drain. And once he lowers the torch, that means you have to plug in the water where the water stops draining. And depending upon how much water has drained, it reveals a code. And this is the code, as the information that is being conveyed. So basically, the duration of the torch time translates into a code word. Isn't that cool? So not much happened until the 1700s, where things really started to pick up. In the 1790s, these semaphore lines are used. This is again a visual means of communication. A mechanical structure like this is mounted on top of a tower, and by manipulating these to form these different shapes, information used to get conveyed. So in the 1800s, heliograph was used. This also goes by the name solar telegraph. Basically, a mirror was used for producing flashes of sunlight, and these flashes follow a Morse code, and this is what was used to convey information. In 1830s, the electric telegraph was used, basically make use of electricity to convey information, and in 1870s the telephone was first started being used. Look at this telephone and look how the telephones these days look. In 1890s, Marconi demonstrated the use of wireless basically by transmitting a signal across the Atlantic Ocean. And the 1920s saw the advent of television. I mean, this is a mass-produced set that was sold in 1940s. See the size of the screen. And 1960s saw the advent of satellite. So here is a picture of the first telecommunication satellite that was put in orbit. So the 1960s saw the beginning of computer networks or the internet. So fiber optic cables were being developed then. More importantly, packet switching, which is the core of internet, this is a concept which we'll cover in detail later, was developed by Klein Rock. So here is Klein Rock with the first router. At that time, these routers were called interface message processors. In 1969, this is the first network that was formed by connecting 4 nodes located in these campuses by a 50 kbps link. Imagine that the bandwidths were so low at that time. So this was the part of ARPANET, stands for Advanced Research Project Agency. And in 1972, this network connected 15 nodes and email was introduced. So in the 1970s, different networks started emerging. There was the Aloha net, basically a wireless net making use of microwaves. And then there was a satellite network, part of DARPA, which is again the defense system. And then BPN is a commercial entity that was also building networks. And in 1976, the Ethernet was conceived. And here is the original conception of the Ethernet. It's a drawing by Metcalf, the person who conceived Ethernet. So with all these networks, there was felt a need that we need to inter-network these networks. So internet stands for inter-network. These networks kind of emerged then. And the end of the 1970s, they felt that we need a protocol that works over the internet. So the TCP/IP was developed by Kahn and Cerf. So by the end of 1970s, roughly around 1981, there were 213 hosts on ARPANET. So the 1980s saw more work. For example, TCP/IP was formalized, that is standardized so that everyone can follow the same protocol. The email application also was standardized through the use of SMTP protocol, and domain name server, which again all these things we'll cover in detail later, was also developed. And an Internet Engineering Task Force was formed, goes by the name IETF, to oversee the development of the standards and the protocol that will be deployed as part of the internet. And in 88, the OSI reference model was received, and 89 saw the development of routing protocols as part of the internet. So this was the map of the entire internet in 1985. Everything could be fit neatly. Now it's impossible to even make a map of the internet. So the early 1990s saw the commercialization of internet. Basically, these internet service providers started offering connection to the internet. 1991, the World Wide Web was started. So this is Tim Berners-Lee workstation, which served as the first web server. Many new applications were developed to be part of the internet. So there was internet messaging, peer-to-peer systems, lot of e-commerce sites started emerging, eBay, Amazon, and so on. And 98, the Google search started, and 99, the Wi-Fi system was introduced. And 2000 saw a whole bunch of applications, Skype in 2003, Facebook 2004, so on and so forth. I mean, this is, you can just read it up. So we have come a long way in telecommunication, has a fascinating history. How are we going to communicate in the future? This is food for thought for you to think about. Hopefully you will add on to some of these glorious inventions.